Please continue eating, but we're going to begin our program for tonight, continuing Olivia's outstanding record of bringing us exceptional speakers. We're very pleased tonight to have Harold Evensky here to talk with us about financial planning is the term that he calls himself. He is president of Evensky and Katz, a firm based in Florida. And as I was doing my research trying to understand more about Harold and what he does, I was intrigued by the fact that he has an undergraduate civil engineering degree. So he may be talking us about building dams or breaking those dams down for retirement savings, and a master's degree in science and business, both from Cornell. As I was looking around trying to find out exactly what would be an interesting way of thinking about introducing Harold, one looks to see what other people say about him. And, you know, people like us are often thought of as one of the top 5 economists on their end of the hall. But when people write about Harold, one gets terms like top professional wealth manager in the country, Dean of Financial Planning, and then also one of the 25 Power Elite. I like that one. Also, movers and shakers and decision makers, the most influential people in financial planning in the profession. Most individual people, and these are all by various professional outlets. One of the top 100 financial advisors. And the interesting thing when you go back and look at this is that you find that he doesn't do it just one year. If they've got lists, he shows up on year after year. So it's very interesting to have a person that has continued to be a national leader in this area that we're trying to learn more about at this conference. Last night over dinner, Harold was saying he thought maybe he was a little out of his usual pond because he deals with individuals, and he thought maybe we were dealing only with institutions. And hopefully over the course of the day, he sat and listened, and maybe he saw that some of us are concerned about individuals, and I think that's certainly true when we look at our research and the reasons we're doing it. So I think maybe instead of the difference of who we're looking at, it is our methodological approaches to the question. So I'm very pleased to introduce today, as our speaker for our dinner here tonight, Harold R. Evensky. Thank you, Harold.
Wow, you know, I wish my mother was here sort of thing. So, this is framing, you know, what the reality that I think it's all about. And it's true, I was saying here, I've had the privilege of speaking literally around the world, but this is one of the more intimidating audiences that I've attended. I had no idea what to talk about, which I'd be interested in, so I did a real potpourri. I'm hoping that out of all these different things, there's at least one idea that you'll find of interest or potentially for research. I'm going to start with risk and retirement planning. There's some of the obvious ones you're familiar with, you know, inflation, longevity. So I'm going to talk about some that may be a little less familiar that I think we need to deal with. One is this concept of squaring of the curve. There's a lot of research, a lot of people talk, the older someone gets, the less money they need. I believe that's yesterday's story. My wife and I, not too long ago, took a very expensive cruise, and it's true, it's been a long time since next to her, I was one of the youngest people there. There were lots of people walking around with canes and walkers and some with oxygen tanks. The point is, people indeed are getting older, but they're not necessarily getting sicker. And I think it's extraordinarily dangerous to plan based on the assumption that income needs are going to be going down. So that's the concept of squaring of the curve. Investment risk, I concluded maybe 7-8 years ago that the future we were looking at was going to be very different. These are real returns. 7.6 was sort of the historical academic Ibbotson data. 12% was what investors' real returns were expecting. And I concluded it was going to be, I believe, less than that. So I did a simple little study. I said, okay, let's look at a sort of a semi-balanced portfolio, 40 bonds, 60 stocks, the prior 20 years. What would earnings have been? Expenses, roughly 1%. Taxes, you've got some current taxable, some ordinary. Capital gains, a lot of deferred. I said effective maybe around 20%. That left 10.4. The numbers that I used going forward were a nominal of 9% for equities and for fixed income, 5.5%. So I came up 7.8. Unfortunately, expenses don't go down with returns. Taxes at the time, I thought, well, thank goodness they're proportionate. So I came up 5.4. That was pretty depressing. But then I realized we have to be concerned about not net of expenses, taxes. We have to be concerned net of expenses, net of taxes, net of inflation. And I came up with 2.4%. That is pretty scary. And so I concluded that although we always talked about expenses and taxes and portfolio management, in the past, 1% here or there, if you were earning 14, who cared? That it is extraordinarily important. If we can save 0.5% by managing expenses and taxes, we can increase the net by close to 20%. Risk value of money, we as practitioners and the media talk about average returns. The problem is, future wealth, the compounding is log normally distributed. That means that the reality of it is there is a high probability of earning less than the mean. So there's a lot of danger in terms of planning and talking about mean returns. Analysis. It's like the financial planning profession discovered Monte Carlo maybe 10 or 15 years ago. Look, I'm an old engineer. It goes back to World War II. We use Monte Carlo, but it amazes me that someone can make 2 more guesses and add 6 decimal places to the answer. Unfortunately, that is endemic in a lot of the planning and a lot of the analysis that's out there. Some of the other problems, it can be very misleading. I consult for a company called PAYCHECK, developed software called Money Guide. It is the major capital needs analysis planning software. But they developed for me this little Monte Carlo card game that is grossly underutilized, but it's a very powerful educational tool. And basically, someone can go and you can pick a table. 0 is 100% bonds, 100% is 100% stocks. And so in this little example, I said you got $1 million portfolio and I want to take $60,000 a year out. So here's the table. There's 30 cards face down. That's returns for the last 30 years or for a particular 30-year period. One of the things doing with this, you can run it at a nominal return and show a fairly high number. Then you talk to the client and say, gee, don't your bills go up, and then rerun it and a real return. So this one, based on a real return, you can see at the bottom it says inflation. There's a 50% chance during this historical period that someone could have withdrawn in real dollars 72,708. So I said, okay, let's be really conservative. Let's only take out 60,000 real dollars per year. And I ran that. Monte Carlo said only a 1% chance of failure. Now, I happened to pick a period that included the 60s where inflation went through the roof and markets dropped. So when I ran the one real period, it ran out of money in 28 years, even though the average return was 10.23 compared to the average for 30 years of 10.7. So the point of that is we need to be sensitive about overplaying the validity of some of the statistics we use. It is an immensely powerful educational tool, but it is an extraordinarily dangerous tool to use and suggest any level of accuracy or total comfort. We talk a lot about funding risk, taking too much out, the magic 4% real withdrawal. What all too often we forget to focus on is lifestyle risk. I have a real issue with the concept of being conservative. There's always a flip side of being conservative. I don't use Social Security. I don't think it'll be around. That's fine. The consequence is someone's going to have to substantially reduce their standard of living for the rest of their life or invest in leveraged pork bellies. So it's like a seesaw. We can't just be conservative. All we can do is try and make the most rational estimates we can and not forget that it's not just the funding risk we need to be concerned about, it's lifestyle risk we need to be concerned about equally. The myth of the income portfolio, another one of my pet peeves. You can go into the popular media, you can go into a lot of advisory firms, they're going to develop an income portfolio. What's an income portfolio? It's one that provides the income someone needs based on dividends and interest. Well, lots of problems with that. One of the most obvious one is our clients need real income, confusing nominal and real. The other problem is if you're doing an income portfolio, the concept of asset allocation, modern portfolio theory, optimization is out the window. The stock bond balance is a function of whatever dividend payments and interest payments happen to be. In today's world, if you do an income portfolio, you're going to end up with largely a fixed income portfolio. And that's not the end of the problem. What happens when someone owns a fixed income portfolio and interest rates go up? Their income goes up. They feel rich. What's happening to the value of their portfolio? It's going down. What happens when the portfolio is going down? Interest is going down. They feel poor. What's happening to the value of their portfolio is going up. So it doesn't provide a consistent return. It doesn't provide a return that from a behavioral standpoint makes any sense. And it's not providing any expectation of the real return that the clients are going to need based on their unique circumstances. Strategies. The active management come in two flavors, tax sensitive and tax insensitive. The problem is, unless the turnover is relatively low, it really doesn't matter how sensitive a manager is. It's not a function of turnover, it's a function of holding period. Manager has a turnover of 100%, clearly not very tax efficient. So I'm super tax efficient. My turnover is only 50%. In terms of holding period, it means I'm paying half the taxes this year and half next year. Present value of that second half, it's no different. So this is a plot. The top solid line would be the plot of a tax-efficient manager, and the dotted line, a tax-inefficient manager says, hey, look, I don't pay any attention. I sell when I want to sell. The point is they merge very quickly as activity picks up. So the concept is avoid the murky middle. If you're going to go to an active manager, go for one who's going for broke that you believe can add alpha and justify all that trading. And the other part, stay with a real tax-efficient manager, which is basically an index fund, because once turnover gets beyond around 15%, there is no particular tax efficiency. That leads to an implementation, an institutional strategy that makes extraordinary sense for retail investors, which is a core and satellite. Basically, in the equity allocation, some portion, typically the bulk, is invested simply to capture market returns, as efficiently from a tax and expense standpoint as possible. Could be the Vanguard S&P 500, if you believe as we do, and Fama French, a value and a small cap factor, can use small cap indexes, DFA, and because we believe in international. So our core is 4 positions. Basically, an S&P Russell index, some overweighting to value and small cap, and an international allocation, 100% passive. Basically, we're simply looking to capture market returns. So we've taken the risk of moving from fixed income to equities, but we've not taken any risk beyond the market exposure. Typically, the implementation strategy of advisors, and certainly the way we used to do it's what I call multi-asset class, multi-style. We want something large cap growth, 3 different managers, each one a little bit different. I remember at one point we had maybe 5% emerging markets, had 3 managers, one who focused on the Pacific Rim, one who focused on the West, and one who was global. So we were picking managers hoping each one would add a little piece of alpha. The problem is that's extraordinarily expensive. Again, in this low return environment, where you have multiple managers, you may have a great manager for 10 years, he retires. Now you need to sell because you got a pig in the poke. It doesn't mean that they did a lousy job. You've got a lot of capital gains to realize. You've got a lot of managers, you have this manager selling something because they were value, the company does well, the growth manager. You don't see it, but you've got position moving back and forth. We did a huge amount doing due diligence, but every year we were firing 2 or 3 managers. Very, very expensive, huge amount of friction. So instead of trying to pick little pieces of alpha, we take that whole risk budget and concentrate it on what we call the satellite. So the satellite can have a lot more risk, and our basic criteria may be tax inefficient, may be expensive, but because it's at the far extreme of that activity, we believe net of that, within a 1-year period, it will do 2% better than the broad market. And we can use there a tactical overlay. Our core 5-year strategic changes very rarely, but the satellite, we can be in emerging markets. They have a phenomenal year, it's up 50%. Well, and we also have it in the core. We may keep it. And the satellite, we expect potential regression back to a more normal period, so we may sell it. We've had value in the core, and after the, the tech bust, value came roaring back, we put growth in the satellite. So the satellite is kind of where the action is from a behavioral standpoint. It's where the story is, the bragging rights for the clients, and we can use a tactical overlay. Finally, behavioral finance, probably my single favorite subject in the whole field. When I first sort of stumbled across that, I did a book back McGraw-Hill Wealth Management back in the 90s, and I said, good Lord, this is our client. This is the real world. This is who we deal with. So a huge amount of powerful knowledge and ideas for practitioners, but one in particular is framing. You know, how's something presented? And I'll give you a choice. Which one of those you want? Now, I mean, it's clear when you look at it, it's kind of silly, but the fact of the matter is we react that way. So we go through, we call a risk coaching process, and one of the questions, and y'all have to play, I'm going to give you a test. You've just walked into Vegas, and you walk through the door, and a band strikes up, and people are standing around cheering, and balloons are dropping, and like, what's going on? And a guy walks up to you, and one arm is stretched out. It looks like there's money to the ceiling, and the other one, he has a brown paper bag with 10 ping pong balls, 8 white and 2 black, and he said, you win. You're our 10 zillionth customer, and you win. You point to this arm, you win $800,000. But it's Vegas. Put your hand in this bag, pick a white ball, you win $1 million. Pick one of the 2 black, you get nothing. How many people want the cash? Raise your hands. How many want to take a chance? Okay. I got one. That's typical. Okay. I made a mistake. You're not in Vegas. You're in hell. I've literally had people say, and the difference is, but okay. Devil walks up to you and says, hey, not a surprise. You lost, but not a surprise. I'm a gambling man. Let me tell you how it works down here. And he flips out this arm and he says, see that? It's empty. Point to that. You owe me $800,000. But I got this brown paper bag, 10 ping pong balls, 8 white, 2 black. Put your hand in. Pick a white. You owe me $1 million. Pick one of the 2 blacks. You owe me nothing. How many want to pay me $800,000? How many want to take a chance? Okay. Y'all are all smart. You know that makes no sense. I just asked you the same question. Why that is so powerful for us in talking to clients, we explain, look, if you go to my buddy upstairs in the brokerage firm and you're a conservative and he says, hey, we got to make you some money. We got to put half your money in stocks. You're going to say, oh, I'm out of here. We go through the planning process. I may tell you exactly the same thing. But if I tell you to put half your money in stocks, it's because I don't want you to lose your standard of living, not because I'm trying to make you rich. The point is we always talk about risk averse. Our clients are loss averse, not risk averse. They'll take a risk not to get poor. And I have had over the years, literally, very conservative clients say, wow, that makes sense. For the first time in my life, I understand why I may not do it, but at least I may consider investing in equities. Okay, breaking the paycheck syndrome. This was, when people retire, they're used to getting a paycheck. So what do we do about that? We have we call our 5-year mantra. We don't think anyone should invest unless they got a 5-year warning to get out. There's just roughly an economic cycle, too much risk. So we bifurcate an investment portfolio into 2 components. The investment portfolio, total return, long-term, reinvest everything, and we call the cash flow reserve. Cash flow reserve is any big lump sums in the next 5 years. I want to buy a second home 3 years from now. I had $1 million, that's $100,000. Oh, you got a $900,000 investment portfolio, $100,000 we're going to put in a 3-year CD or money market or something. When it came to income, retirement income, I said, well, carving out 5 years is a huge opportunity cost. I did this back in the early 80s. I ultimately came up with 2 years. So someone needs $40,000 a year. We say, okay, you've got $920 to invest. We're going to take 80. We're going to put that in money market and short-term bonds. So the investment portfolio is the balance. To the extent there's too much opportunity cost, I can slightly adjust. Instead of doing 50-50, I can do 55 stocks and 45 to balance that exposure. And everything's reinvested. I can control the tax consequences. I can control the rebalancing. As we manage the investment portfolio, we've got very clear rebalance parameters. Somewhere along the way, I'm going to need to rebalance. The market collapsed. What am I going to do? I'm going to sell bonds and buy stocks. When I do that, I'm looking over at my cash flow reserve and say, wow, that's down. Let me take the opportunity to fill it back up. In the cash flow reserve portfolio, we literally set up, and you can do it at a Schwab or Fidelity or Merrill, to pay our clients 1/24 of that into their checking account every month, just like a paycheck. Does it work? Absolutely. We can manage purchasing power risk because I can increase it, volatility. It manages the volatility risk. The story I just told earlier, so we did this in the early 80s. So 87 crash. Back in those days, most of my clients were very conservative CD investors, and I was scared to death that they were all dead. So I had everyone in the office like at 7:30 sitting by the phone, didn't ring. 9 o'clock, I said, okay, hit the phones. First person I called, little old widow, Miami Beach, sounded like my grandmother. Val, what you want? And I said, well, you may have noticed the market was a little rocky, over the last week. And honest to God, she said, I know, 5 years, 5 years, 5 years. The point is, she knew where grocery money was coming from. It was literally a non-event. And no one was happy, carried us through the tech bust, through the Grand Recession, an immensely powerful behavioral structure. This is brand new for me. The Heckam Saver, new reverse mortgage came out at the end of last year. And it seemed potentially of real interest. Basically, at very little cost, you can establish a reverse mortgage, $2,000 to maybe $5,000 or $6,000. Don't have to borrow on it. Cost, if you do, is fairly modest. I see it as a risk management tool, not as a leverage, not as a credit, not as a cash flow, but it's unlike a home equity loan, it is non-cancelable, which is what happened during the Grand Recession. They got canceled. So if it's established, and I worked with one of my associates, one of the professors at Tech, and my teaching assistant, now it's part of his PhD thesis, and ran tens of thousands of simulations, and it is a very powerful tool. So we go from a 2-bucket approach to a 3-bucket approach. So if we ever go to the point and we can cut down that second bucket from 2 years to 6 months, and if we ever use that up, then we would tap in to this reverse mortgage. The markets get better, we pay it back again. A little hard, there's a yellow line, but the red line would be just a 6-month cash flow reserve. The dotted green line, this is the survival probability, substantially increases. The fact of the matter is the loan balance, in most cases, it's always paid off over time. That's, what percent of a loan is still outstanding in the simulations. This is showing how frequently through these simulations it's likely to be drawn on. The red is none. The green is less than 20 draws. In other words, people draw, borrow it, pay it back, draw, pay it back. So most of the time, like fire insurance, you would never even use it. What's the horizon? How long is it likely if you draw on it? The red is 1 to 6 months, the green is 7 to 12 months. So even if you draw, markets recover, you're going to pay it back fairly quickly. finally, we need to keep in mind, and I heard a lot of talks about probability today, but we need to remember Pascal's wager. It's not just the probability, it's the consequences. Have a client say, you may live to 90 years old. I'll never live that long. You may not live that long, but the risk of being wrong and planning to 85 and not having money left and living 5 more years is fairly catastrophic. So as part of all this planning, we need not just to think in terms of probabilities, we need to think and balance the consequences. What other things? Rebalance, don't chase returns past performance, ignore financial pornography, manage expenses, manage expectations, and ultimately this is what I think financial planning is all about. That's what our business. We're not trying to maximize anyone's return. We're trying to maximize their quality of life. So.
Thank you very much. Harold's agreed to take some questions for a while, so if you have a question, raise a hand.
Boy, I blew everyone out. Huh?
So
I would have talked slower.
what are you telling your clients about real equity returns for the next 10 years?
Oh, good question. Actually, we're thinking 20 and 30 years, and we are in the process. Yeah, I'm sorry. When I said probably 7 years ago, we made major adjustments using 6% real return for equities, 2.5% for fixed income. Equities, that's about 1.5 under the historical average. Fixed income was about 0.5% higher because we felt subsequent to long-term fixed income, a good deal was pre-World War II. Inflation wasn't that big a factor. We are in the process of changing our assumptions. Equities now 5.5 and fixed income 1 3/4. And the only reason I haven't dropped equities more than that is because I don't have the nerve to face my clients. But I don't consider that conservative. I consider it, if anything, a reasonably aggressive assumption. And in looking at, I did a table of a large number of major financial services firms, Goldman, Morgan, and others. They're pretty much across the board in that range or lower. Excuse me. The only one that I know that is a little bit higher than that is Professor Siegel. But he's always been stocks for the, rah, so it doesn't surprise me. But I don't think most practitioners, or most investors are thinking in those kinds of numbers, and I certainly don't think they're thinking of what it means after you take out taxes and transaction costs. So I think the way investors are investing today is potentially disastrous.
So we've been talking about at the table there about how much people need to save for a replacement rate. And so what do you tell your clients, not the ones that are already in retirement, but as they're moving toward retirement, in terms of a target? You've said more than 85, more than 100%.
It's interesting. I serve as a consultant to this software company. Basically, I talk about anchoring on the efficient frontier. We feel there's 2 anchors. What real return do they need to accomplish their goals, and what risks can they live with? And that's something we talked about. What is risk tolerance? And I finally concluded there's only one, in my opinion, rational definition for a practitioner of risk tolerance. And that's, what is that threshold of pain just before you call me up and say, Harold, I can't stand it, I'm going to cash? Because that's the reality. That's what I need to plan for. So our philosophy is, if someone is near retirement and we feel like there's a reasonable chance that we can make some guesses, and we go through the planning process. In other words, what are your goals? What are the priorities? Social Security, all of that into this, massive number crunching, and we come up with a number. If that return, we think we can achieve it at a risk lower than their risk tolerance, our recommendation is that we design for the lower return. Largely because I don't have that much confidence in our ability to evaluate the risk. So we're not trying to maximize return. It's not uncommon for us to tell someone that may be in a 60% portfolio, we think you can achieve your goals in a 40% equity portfolio. If someone is beyond 5 years from retirement, someone is young, then I have no confidence in our ability to guesstimate what they're going to need in retirement. So then we will design the portfolio at their risk tolerance, which would typically mean something more in terms of equities. But the maximum equity allocation we'll recommend is 80%. The reason for that is to be able to rebalance. Rebalance puts an automatic tactical overlay. If I have 100% equities, we go through what we did a lot of times recently. I just have to sit there and watch it. If I've got at least 20% in fixed income, when the market's collapsed, I can rebalance. I can buy some stocks cheap. When the market's going through the roof, I have the ability to take some of that off the table and put it in fixed income.
But if you're not talking about the investment side, you're talking about the target. How much money should you be trying to achieve to generate, given that you're going to be managing my money, and I'm 30 or 35, should I be shooting for?
Okay, we will run this capital needs analysis software and show them a number, but we don't think the number means much of anything because that's just to educate them. We'll default back and say, look, you need X zillions of dollars, but who knows what you're going to need. So our investment advice defaults back to the risk tolerance. In other words, put as much in the equity market because we do believe that over time, maybe not 5 years, maybe not 10 years, but certainly if someone's 35, over the next 30 years, we think stocks will earn more than bonds. And if they can live with the volatility, it's irrelevant. Where they're taking money out, it becomes a lot more relevant.
Thanks. I was wondering if you thought that the general level of interest rates was going to rise substantially before too long, and if so, would you be recommending that people get out of long-term bonds?
The answer is, I believe interest rates are definitely going to rise, not necessarily in the short term. We would never use long-term bonds anyway. Just the risk reward once we get out of 10 years, and since most of our clients are munis and got call provisions, it really makes no sense. Typically, in a perfect world, we'll ladder bonds up to 10 years, 1, 2, 3, 4 through 10, and with a average quality of A or better and a duration of about 5 years. We've been very defensive for, in hindsight, way too long, so we've targeted a duration of probably closer to 3.5 or 4 years and AA quality. What we're doing now is a little more barbelling because I'm more concerned about the short end than I am about the intermediate end because I can see short-term rates going up much faster than the intermediate-term rates. So even though it's a much shorter duration, I think there's a little more risk. So we've taken our duration out to probably about 4.5 years, but doing it by concentrating a little more in the intermediate term and a little less in the short term.
Questions? Yes.
Well, Harold, since John Amerix isn't here, I have to play John Amerix, and I have to ask you about annuities. Okay. And how do the tradition is that financial planners have eschewed annuities, and I think you have a more subtle view of annuities. So give us a little insight.
That was a setup, yeah, because many years ago I was famously quoted, and it turns out Walter's editor at Money Magazine told me he remembered, because he's the one that quoted me, is saying I'd wash my mouth out with soap before I used annuities, and immediate annuities, and my insurance friends remind me of that. And I now believe that SPIA's immediate annuities are going to be one of the, if not the single most important investment vehicle the next decade and longer. And the reason for that is the product that existed a decade ago was lousy product. I mean, the insurance companies took all the mortality return off the table, and today there's good product out there. And certainly the work that John had done a number of years ago and others, I think is definitive. It will substantially increase the survival probability of a portfolio. And again, our job is not to maximize someone's return. It's to maximize the quality of life and the likelihood they can continue to enjoy it. So I think immediate annuity is going to be extraordinarily important. I think mortality insurance is going to really be important because of the behavioral, because it's hard to get people to do an immediate, but they're lousy discounters of futures, so mortality insurance looks really cheap and like a great deal. I mean, I only put that much in, I get this much down the road. Now, the issue that I come from the fee-only universe, as I describe it, the holier-than-thou universe. Brokers are bad guys. They get commissions. We're only, fee-only, no conflicts. We're going to face a conflict way beyond any broker, because the reality is if we tell someone take 20, 30% of your portfolio and annuitize it, we just lost 20 or 30% of our income stream. But all the research I've seen, John's, all the work that Pong Chen, Ibbotson's done, suggests that that's the range that's going to make sense for most investors. So bottom line, tell John I'm a believer today.
All of the work tends to be around people who aren't saving enough, and you had that sort of seesaw example. Did you find, as a result of the crisis, that some people went incredibly conservative and just want to just stop spending, when in fact they could have afforded to keep spending? Interestingly enough, we didn't see that, but we utilize this planning software. It's very interactive. We've got a big screen. So our whole framing to our clients is, we're not telling you what to do. We're trying to empower you to make good decisions. So we'll simply run the analysis and say, look, you can save more, but based on everything you've told us, and you know what the assumptions are, if it makes sense to you, because the nature of our practice, we have clients who certainly are not wealthy, but by any standards are well off, but they also live modestly compared to their resources. So we spend more time telling our clients to spend money than we do telling them to save money.
Last question.
I'm interested in your comment about keeping lifestyles and purchasing power. What do you think now about the apparent negative return, real return on tips, and how that affects your investments?
I don't understand it, because I don't understand what that implies for future inflation, because it doesn't seem to make any sense to where I think future inflation is going to be. We have an allocation, all our portfolios to tips. We have reduced it somewhat, but again, we're not in for the next economic cycle. We're in tips, in effect, to guarantee that basic core real return. We did reduce it as a result of that, the allocation to it, but it's a permanent part of our allocation.
Last question.
How important is planning for bequest in your considerations?
Yeah, we were chatting. I've had my practice 25 years. Bequest is not a significant factor. I've not seen it, and talking to my friends, I read about bequest all the time. But my experience in our universe is that it is not a significant factor. Our clients would like to leave something to their kids. They hope it's left. To the extent we have a talk, it's, hey, if you give them $10,000 a year now, that's going to be a whole lot more important than giving a couple $100,000 or $1 million, 20 or 30 years from now. So we're much more focused, and our clients are much more focused on giving their kids, to the extent they can afford it, something now than bequest.
Thank Carol again.
Thank you all.
A gift from Olivia and the Pension Research Council.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.